You ready?
Yes,
I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Godzilla.
So we did attempt to record this episode last week, but I was deathly ill. And I really did my best, Andrew, to try and get through it, but I was so sick. I think I got like food poisoning
Yeah,
or someone had poisoned me because it was just, I spent the whole day just like lying in bed trying not to die. But I think round two is going to be
it's
better.
fine. Yeah,
We just had more time to stew on it, on
yeah,
Godzilla itself.
and I think that's fine because um I think it's fine to think about it more because it's a good movie to think about and a good movie to talk about. I think.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah,
So is this the second time you've seen this Godzilla movie, or have you seen it more than twice?
yes, I've seen this movie. This is like the second time I watched it. I think I watched it for the first time probably like a year or two ago, so not too long ago. Um, but yeah, um, yep.
So I went into this movie with not a whole lot of expectations. I mean, I knew some of the background. I knew, of course, that it was sort of a critical statement about particularly the atomic bomb and the H bomb. And I knew that the American version, which we have talked about in the past on here, which I did not watch, although I guess would be an interesting watch because you've seen the American version, right?
When you say American, do you mean like the one from 2014? Because
Mm,
there are multiple American
yeah.
versions.
I guess I should clarify. Um, I've seen the 2014 American version. I guess I mean the American edit of the original
Okay,
Godzilla.
yeah. No, I have, and like it's probably not worth watching or even like discussing. It's just kind of like hilarious how they like edited it to where all they do is like intercut like footage of like an American actor guy kind of like reacting to footage that happens in the original movie. It's pretty ridiculous, but I guess that's just how it is. Again, it's not even worth talking about.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, so I didn't think we needed to talk much about the American version, but I think it's intriguing how sort of the American representation of Godzilla, at least like when we talk about the original Godzilla and sort of how it kind of swept the United States, and this was the beginning of sort of the monster films, as it were. I mean, there were monster films before this, but this sort of swept the nation with a craze of monster films, like which would become like The Swamp Thing, Frankenstein, The Mummy, all these kind of
But
films of the like Warner Brothers 1950s cinematic universe.
I thought those movies were way before Godzilla. I think they are. Those movies are like 30, 40s, I think.
I think you're right. But what Godzilla came out in 48 or no, it came out in 54. It came out in 54, right?
54,
54.
1954.
Okay.
Less than 10 years after the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and
That's
Nagasaki.
wild.
That to me is like why like I think someone pointed this out on Letterboxd and I think it's true. I
Mhm.
think that is why like movies are just like a very interesting artistic medium. Just even just that like that idea of like to me like Godzilla is like the perfect like synthesis of like history, entertainment, like spectacle, special effects, filmmaking, heroic sacrifice. Just like to me it is like again, it's just like the perfect synthesis of all these different things into the film object. There's like nothing else like it in the entire world.
Yeah, it's such a raw film, and I think that's something I didn't really expect from this piece. I mean, I knew sort of the anti-war sentiments, and I think it is a bit ironic when we talk about Godzilla and the many movies that have come since then,
Oh,
and
oh, yeah, I mean it's the longest running film franchise of all
is
time.
it really? I
Yeah,
guess,
of course it is. Yeah.
yeah, I guess not really. Well, why do you think Godzilla has lasted? I mean, why do you think they're still making Godzillas to this day?
Well, I think like a movie like Godzilla, and I think like other Godzilla movies too. Well, especially this movie in particular. Like, I just think that like I think it can appeal to everyone. Um, I think a kid could watch Godzilla and enjoy it because it is simple to understand. I think even like an American kid who can't read subtitles would be able to watch it and enjoy it and get it because it's a big monster destroying things and the humans are trying to figure out how to stop it. Like that is very understanding. That is very a child would be able to understand that really well. But I think even into adulthood, as you learn more about history and filmmaking and things like that, there's still plenty to like part and parcel and be entertained by and to think about. So I just think that that is probably like a big part of like why this movie is so good
Yeah,
and why it is continued to be appreciated like generation after generation. And like I know that sequels, and I've watched like some of them, they do get a little bit more on like the silly, kind of like almost science fiction side. And I think
right.
those are really cool too. So when you start digging into those, like I think they're like a little bit less dark um than this movie. This movie can be pretty dark.
No
Um,
kidding.
although I will even say that like the newest Godzilla, which I saw in theaters, that movie is also pretty it definitely leans heavily things going on. There are definitely noticeable difference from the original, but it definitely leans on less silliness and more kind of like how like crazy the devastation that Godzilla causes and like in the movie. Um, and sequels, there other monsters get introduced. King Ghidorah,
Right.
Mothra, and they fight each other, they work together on things. Like they kind of have like their own like relationships and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And but that is entertaining in itself as well. So yeah.
And I love the big conflict here because I think what's interesting about this film, and I remember when watching this, kind of having almost this Jaws like experience with it. And it's very different than Jaws. And I don't think we should equate the two films because they have very different ideology and a lot of different things. But something that I think is very similar between these two pieces is both of these films don't really start, and particularly Godzilla, we don't really start with our main character. I mean, of course, eventually we get our protagonist, who I would argue is the scientist and sort of that
Sure.
whole family dynamic. But I mean, for 15 to 20 minutes, there's no Godzilla. I think we see Godzilla for the first time. I remember like
Well,
pause here. Yeah.
the thing about Godzilla that's cool is that you hear that the sound of him is the first thing you experience in the movie with the opening
Yeah.
credits.
Yeah. I forgot about that. That's a great point. Is sort of like there's kind of this underlying tension of and expectations of kind of knowing what's going to happen before it happens, which is always interesting in film, especially when you're watching films as old as this one, because there are so many expectations laid down on the film. But it's not until minute 22 that we actually get our first viewing of Godzilla. And this isn't a long movie. I think it's what, like 80 minutes,
Yeah,
85
it's like an
minutes?
no, it's not. No, it's like
No
it's
longer.
almost like it's an hour 40 almost.
Okay, yeah, hour 40, so like closer to 100 minutes. But I mean, the point is, you go for the first 20 minutes to the first like fourth of the film without ever actually seeing Godzilla, and he's kind of
They're
just
they
there in the
lo- they're
background.
investigating it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. I love that moment when, which I'm sure I've seen this. I can't. I know like a bunch of movies have done this like thing, and I'm sure it comes from Godzilla, like it's a homage. But that moment when they're in like this sort of pit and they're kind of like utilizing the radiation thing. And he's like, we're actually standing in a footstep of Godzilla.
Yeah.
That's a great
That's
one.
great. Yeah, yeah. I like when they're on the island, like the fucked up island, like where the villagers live and stuff like that. That sucks. You know what I mean? When they're like, yeah, like the well is like poison and stuff like that. Like that sucks. It feels bad.
Yeah, it's a film that I think is a lot more complicated than it's often given credit for. Not just because like it's not just about this idea of killing Godzilla, because like the weird part about this is like they have a solution to kill him pretty early in the film. I mean, they don't like reveal that solution, but like we know
Right.
that there's ways to kill this thing. And of course they try different things. You know, they try like shooting at it and all these different things. But what's fascinating is like the real conflict here isn't trying to destroy Godzilla. It's the question of if we should even be attacking this thing in the first place. As I
Right.
was attempting to point out last time we tried to record this conversation, is Godzilla, even though he blows up like a ship at the beginning of the film, he
Yeah.
really only attacks when he's first attacked, right? It's only like when
And
someone
they
comes.
destroy, yeah, and they destroy where he lives too,
Yeah,
essentially, right? Because they're
right.
doing the test down there.
hmm And so there's this very real idea of sort of what it means to enact violence upon others and what it means to cause war. And there's this big conflict here of, you know, when do we respond with violence? And is that ever the case? Because that seems to be kind of the movement in most of the films. Everyone's like, okay, it's like first we attack, then Godzilla attacked. Now we're gonna get
Yeah.
bigger, and then they're gonna get bigger, and so on and so forth. And of course, our protagonist scientist here, which, by the way, one of the greatest actors, in my opinion,
Oh, the
and
old guy, the
the
guy who
old
plays
guy, the
Ikiru, right?
scientist, yeah,
Yeah,
who's
he's
in like
awesome.
all of Akira Kurosawa
He's
stuff, and
sick.
he's in some of Ozu stuff. I mean, you know, one of
It's his name is
yeah.
like what's his name?
I guess I should
I
probably
think
know
it's
his name.
oh, Takashi Shimura.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Takashi. Uh,
He yeah, he's
it.
awesome.
I guess I don't know. For some reason, I always thought like Godzilla was a B movie, but obviously, I mean, looking at
Kind
the
of is.
production and the actors involved, I
Yeah.
guess like there's not a lot of other big name actors in this. Like a lot of the other actors, if you look at their like Letterboxd, IMDb, most of the stuff they do is Godzilla related, Godzilla sequels. But
Yeah,
to get a big
Ishiro
name
Honda,
like that,
I will say like Ishiro Honda, who is the director of the movie, he
yeah,
directed this movie and he directed a fuck ton of Godzilla movies, but he directed all kinds of different movies. He made documentaries, he made
okay,
dramas, he made comedies, like he made all kinds of different movies.
okay. So he wasn't just like I made a Godzilla movie and now I'm gonna just make Godzilla
And
movies.
I think that's definitely his most famous, like
Sure.
his claim to fame, right? Is that he's the Godzilla director. But yeah, he made all kinds of different stuff, I think.
Okay. But just seeing him in any role is always exciting. And he gives
Yeah,
such an
that guy is
incredible
awesome. Yeah.
performance here and a complex performance because he's sort of weighing the destruction and violence that Godzilla is creating, right? Godzilla is going through towns. He's breathing fire, I'm guessing, is what he's
It's
doing.
no, it's see, you don't know anything about Godzilla. It's essentially like a nuclear like blast, essentially. It's essentially like akin as if like a nuclear bomb went off or something like that, but through his like fire breath blast.
God, so it's like a
So it's even worse than fire.
okay, I just thought like he was radioactive because of the nuclear bombs, but like he literally like breathes
Well, I
nuclear.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a nuclear, yeah, it's like
How do you know
that's
that?
essentially what it is. Why would I like Godzilla?
Okay, but that's not
It's
something you find out in the movie, right? Like I didn't miss some big part of the movie.
That's a good point. It's not really something that like discuss very much, but I just think that like I think like you could like look at like the devastation that he causes in the movie as not really just fire, right? Like it's even more
Right.
pronounced, I would say, and the destruction he causes.
Absolutely. It's holistic. And I think that's going back to that moment where they're in the footstep is a very good
And I think
representation
too,
of the
like
yeah.
yeah, that's a good point. Like the footstep, and I think too, like when they're treating people after he destroys everything, some of them have radiation sickness, right? Like he's
Yeah.
like spreading it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
It's weird. It's weird. Yeah, it's just. I was just gonna say, like, it's weird. Like, Godzilla happens after World War II. It's weird. It's like a movie that takes place in Japan after World War II. So there is the context of like the atomic bombs and everything,
yeah.
but also Godzilla is like a representation and of kind of like more of the atomic bomb and
Mhm.
sort of like and like sort of like the response of like nature of the atomic bomb and the creation and draw and like use of it. Like to me, that is just like it's just so, like you said, like complex. Like it's amazing.
Yeah. And there's something I think when even when we talk about it that and so when so many people sort of have this discussion is of course there's the discussion of the atomic bomb and sort of the atrocities of it and how those the atrocity of the atomic bomb isn't just that sort of one moment, right? You talk about like the fire bombings or these other things that militaries have used for hundreds, not thousands of years. What makes the atomic bomb so much more devastating is it doesn't just destroy a place for a moment, right? It's not a place that like
Yeah.
hurts people when it's done. It has that lasting effect of pretty much, dozens, hundreds of years of not being able to
Mhm.
live there or survive there, like literally destroying everything to exist in that area. And then on top of that too, when I came into this film, speaking about our own expectations again, is I expected this was like a very anti American kind of like, shame on you for dropping the atomic bomb, which of course, like part of it is about that. But then it's also
But
too,
it's like it's way bigger than that though.
yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
just yeah,
It's so much more about like war in and of itself and what it means to cause violence and our response, right? Because I think so much of this film isn't so much about the atomic bomb itself, but the response that we as a culture, we as a country, we as a world respond to those acts of violence. Like, is the
yeah,
solution here to when atomic bombs are dropped to drop more atomic bombs, which of course, like this is in the midst 1954 of the Cold War. I mean, it's not to the
yeah.
point where, of course, we'll get in like 1960 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this is a very real thing at the moment. And Soviets kind of creating their thing, and the United States kind of creating what they're going to do, and Japan's kind of in this weird middle place because there's been American occupation for a couple of years after the war, but I'm pretty sure by
And
this
there's no one,
point
yeah, yeah.
there's no
And
more.
their perspective, and of course
Yeah,
their perspective is like, unique because they actually experienced what it was like to like, have a bomb dropped on them of that,
yeah, and
of
I
that.
think.
Yeah.
I think that just makes it all the more powerful because the response isn't, which I've seen in a lot of really well-made films, is either the response is just like pure anger and frustration,
Uh-huh.
or a response of just like I talk about like that wagging finger sort of thing. But what's so fascinating about this film is instead of going out and blaming right other people, instead of going out and saying you did wrong and we're the victim, it it's turning inward and
Uh-huh.
saying, and not obviously like blaming like the people of Japan for the dropping of the two atomic
Right.
bombs, but rather like looking inward and like, how do we respond to this? How do we live with this? And
Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
the solution here, if there is any?
It,
Because
it also it also yeah, in Godzilla 2, it also kind of like it also creates like um this really dark but possible hypothetical in which like for at least from Japan, the country of Japan's perspective, like what if like the war and the atomic bombs being dropped, what if that was like all for nothing, because of course Japan, like they undergo this horrible thing and they're able to rebuild into a nation that is particularly influential and powerful, right? Like I think that's fair to say. But
yeah,
like what if like something else happened anyway, right? What if like the
yeah,
rebuilding of Japan was like all for naught and like everything, and what if like something even crazier happened where an indestructible, like as a result of, our humans, folly of, weapons and war and destruction, what if like that resulted in like the earth and nature, something which is essentially more or less um you know um indecipherable, honestly, to humans. What if like it responded in the form of like an indestructible giant lizard dinosaur guy, and it just destroyed everything again anyway, and that kind of like hypothetical, you know, it kind of like is a representation of kind of like the post World War II like Japanese anxiety, I would say.
yeah, 100%, absolutely. And I made this comparison to Jaws earlier, and I kind of want to harken back to that because so much of this film, which I did not expect is very bureaucratic. Like it's a lot of
That's the
bureaucracy
point
going
of the,
on.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's almost like the point of the movie too, really,
Mm.
because like, yeah, Godzilla is awesome. We were talking about Godzilla and stuff, and he's great. He's awesome. And you know, when he shows up on screen is great. But the bureaucracy, the government like bureaucracy and kind of like the meetings and discussions that they hold and stuff like that, like to like figure out how to stop Godzilla and like all this stuff, or whether, like you said, whether or not they should attack him, like that is like most of the movie, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that in many ways this is really much more a political drama than
Yeah.
it is like a upfront, even
It,
more than a war drama or a
it's like high and
surveillance
low.
movie. Yeah.
It's like high and low or something like that. Yeah.
It weirdly is. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't think like this would be fascinating, you know, film watching, but I mean, when you think about it, there's not really a whole lot of scenes with Godzilla. I mean, there are some really amazing scenes, and just taking a moment to admire the special effects of this 1954 film that has effects that even today are fascinating, and the way
Yeah, they're
Godzilla
great.
looks is really cool. I'm guessing they use, is it like a combination of like stop motion and like rear projection? I was trying to like
Of
get,
Godzilla?
yeah, like Godzilla himself. He's like, is it like a stop
You're
motion or is it like a guy in a suit? Is it,
It's a
what
guy
is
in a
it?
suit,
Okay.
motherfucker. Like, yeah, like that's like the most famous part about it. Yeah, no, you know, so Godzilla is interesting because like I was clicking around on the Wikipedia page of the movie, I'm saying, and the guy who did the special effects is this guy named Iji Subayara, right?
Sure.
He is like a very, I was like poking around on his Wikipedia page, and he is like, I never really knew about his name until we like were gonna do the episode, and he is like a very famous and influential like movie special effects and inventor guy. And in fact, I believe it's funny you say rear projection. I believe he was the first person to ever utilize like rear projection in a movie. He also invented a basically like the prototype for camera cranes. Like
Wow.
he essentially invented the prototype for that, and of course he did the special effects in this movie, and
Yeah.
of course like the, you know, the suit, the guy wearing the big Godzilla suit. In sequels, it's more apparent. It's more apparent that it's a guy in a suit, of course.
Right.
And even there is even some shots in this movie where you can kind of see it kind of fold,
Hmm.
you know, where you can kind of see like the rubber suit fold. But in this movie in particular, the way that they light it and the black and white photography, I think it looks great. I wouldn't think of any other, like I don't know what else you would have done to improve it.
Yeah. I mean, it's truly exceptional, and we don't often talk about special effects on the show because neither of us are experts in that field. That's definitely one of the areas probably that we are weakest in. But the use of miniatures is fantastic. Whether you're talking
Yeah.
like building whole villages or trains or all these different things, like it's truly amazing. And even if it is sort of like a little more noticeable to the eye, to the acute eye of the 21st century film goer, it still just looks amazing. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we've talked about like special effects that like don't look great but work anyways. But I think in this, like it legitimately, not just for like a 1954 film, but just for a film period, like it looks really good. Especially like that. I'm
Hmm.
trying to figure out like how they get that like fire special effect. Like when he's like breathing
That's a good point. I
out of
wonder
his
if it's
mouth.
just like a layer, I guess. Like I don't even know how
It's
you
got
would
to
say it.
be.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
where they laid the film on top of.
Yeah, like an animation almost. Yeah.
Yeah, it it's such a cool effect among so many amazing effects. And then I think where so many people struggle with miniatures is they kind of stick with the miniature for long periods of time. But I think part of the reason this works, and I think of that moment where he's attacking the city and it cuts between a miniature of a house and then the inside of the house, the interior where like the three of them
Yeah,
are
that works really
standing.
well.
I think that
Yeah.
works really well because then you're like in your mind, right? You've created that illusion of like, oh no, this really is like
Hmm.
like a house in a city, and
Yeah.
great like rain effects and wind effects too. It honestly, like
Hmm.
you go on and on about the special effects because it's
Yeah.
so
And
amazing.
I think if you're watching the movie and you're like if you're watching the movie and you just like are just like I can imagine like watching this movie with like someone who's like really cynical and be like, "Oh, that looks really fake," or da da da, or "Oh, it's clearly a guy in a suit." Da 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 da. I think if you have, I think if you're watching the movie and you're having those thoughts, I think you're completely like missing the point. You know, like you're completely like you've lost like the plot of like what of how like gargantuan like the movie actually like does feel and look.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. And again, like those Godzilla moments are so powerful because they sort of are few and far between. I mean, I'm trying
yeah,
to think back, like there's only three, four Godzilla scenes in the movie.
probably, yeah,
Yeah. Because again, most of the movie is just people, which doesn't sound exciting, but like in the moment, it is like very thrilling. Just people sitting around talking about like, what are we going to do? How are we supposed to survive with this? And the existential crisis of he is sort of causing great destruction. And the way
yeah.
they sort of like decide and like that one scientist, I love his conflict, the nephew, I guess, of like the professor, I think, or like nephew-in-law. He's like marrying.
I think, yeah, like, yeah, the old scientist, like, he has the daughter, and
Right.
she has like, you know, he's like an officer, like an army guy,
Yeah.
her boyfriend or or husband or something like that, or like a boyfriend. They want to get married,
Yeah.
and then that guy has a brother who's also a
Okay.
scientist,
Yeah.
who's the
That's
guy
like
with Serizawa, the guy with the eye patch, who's a great character as well, and of course ties the movie really great together because like right, Godzilla, he's the result of right like the atomic bomb and stuff like that, and of course he the way that he is now physically and probably, you know, mentally is the result of the war as well.
yeah. I never really thought about that, but that is a great point. And sort of the horror of it is that like he has a solution pretty early in the film, like he knows what to do, but he's terrified
Right.
to release that in the
He's
world.
so it's that
Yeah.
anxiety. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
that
yeah. Which is
post-war
like,
anxiety.
yeah, I mean, it's just like seeps this film, which I did not expect from this film, is like just the amount of like anxiousness and worry that comes with it. And I thought this was going to be a film about like how do we fight this or how do we live past this, right? How do we survive this? But it's so much more like um it's almost like a discovery of a new atomic bomb, basically, like the thing that he discovers,
Right.
the way that like, which I'm not a chemist, but I'm not exactly sure that's
It doesn't
how.
matter. It doesn't
But it
matter.
doesn't matter, it doesn't matter at the point.
Yeah.
Right, but basically like he can release all the oxygen in like a large
Yeah,
area.
it like it like makes her like acidic essentially. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's a crazy idea and I love it. I mean, it's absolutely
Mhm.
wild. But like he has the
Yeah.
solution so early on, but he's like I can't tell you the secret and you can't tell anybody this, because like
Yeah.
the moment we release this idea into the world, and I love that what he was saying is like, it's not just like when I release this, like other people will like figure out how to do it themselves. It's that like they will come to me, and because like simply because the fact that I am human, like I will reveal that secret eventually, like whether it's because of money or torture or whatever. And like that's inevitable.
Yeah.
This like an inevitable like reach towards like the next level success. And of course, it's kind of paralleling what was happening during the 1940s and the Manhattan Project, right? This idea of like all these great minds, these great scientists coming together, and sort of how uh while like we think of this idea of the Manhattan Project as like, wow, you have the greatest minds in human history coming together, like to
Mhm.
think about like physics and chemistry and all these
Yeah.
different things, but then like they create one of the cruelest and most evil things, and how the progression of humanity is simultaneously like beautiful and haunting and terrifying. And he's kind of has the same thing going on where like, he's doing this for science, but then like, well, but what is that science for? Like that science inevitably is going to lead to destruction.
Right. Yeah, no, and again, like I just love like what that character kind of like represents and what he's all about and stuff like that. And I just like I just find like too like the whole like sort of like end part of the movie like really moving as well.
Mm.
where they try to convince him finally to use the weapon to destroy Godzilla, where they like turn on the TV and stuff like that. 'Cause it's just like look at this shit. Like, he's just kind of like it's just kind of he kind of has to, be exposed. And then also I just love like I love like the choir of like the girls, right? Like they're like
Yeah.
children and they're like singing the song. Again, that's just like another great like cinematic moment, right?
Mhm.
And uh like using that to convince him, like he's like we're like watching a movie, and in order to convince him to like it's weird, like we're watching the movie, and in order to convince the guy, Serizawa, to like use his like weapon to defeat Godzilla, he has to like watch the events of the movie essentially. Like, he has to watch what has happened in the movie so far.
Yeah. And I think what's also interesting is there's not any good solution to this situation because, as they point out, like Godzilla is fundamentally a problem. I mean, he is causing mass destruction, and obviously, like their solution with the tanks and the missiles, it is only perpetuating the problem. But again, like if you're attacked and you're trying to like save, your family, your culture, your
Yeah.
people, like of course you would do the same thing. How else are you supposed to react to that? And that's kind of the argument that they
Yeah.
make to the old professor because he's like, we should be studying him. And they're like, this guy's like, killing people and murdering like, large amounts of people and, ruining entire cities, like these harbor cities. Like we can't just study him. Although there is that, of course, great line, arguably one of the greatest lines in cinematic history.
Yeah.
Do you know which line I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, I want to say the line right, but I know I'm not going to say it right.
Just say it verbatim,
He says something like,
or paraphrase it.
right, uh, he was born in the,
Oh, like the fire of yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That line goes so hard. I know what you're talking about. I know
yeah,
what you're talking about. He was like born in the fire of like the atomic bomb or something
something
like
like that.
that. Like,
Something. Oh,
oh,
he was
that's a good
baptized. He was
baptize.
baptized. That's
Yes,
why it works
baptize.
so
The
well.
use of the word baptize is like that is one of the hardest lines in movie history. I completely agree with you.
Oh my God! Like you hear that line, you're like, that's
Oh, yeah,
oh,
it's amazing. Yeah.
oh my
But
God.
again, like we discussed, like the movie is like again, like the spectacle of it is great, but it is a lot of like sitting around and talking, like
Hmm.
especially the beginning, like you said, where they like talk about going to the island, and then they go to the island, and then they talk again about what they found at the island and stuff like that. Like, it's really just kind of like using what like it is like a movie that is very like close to the like ground and is like trying to say like what like hypothetically if this happened, what would they do, right?
Yeah.
And like they build a huge electric fence. That seems like a solution that they would
It's
maybe
like a good
probably do
idea.
in real life. Yeah, like if that seems like a solution that they would try to come up with in real life. But what if like nothing worked, and it just like kept on getting worse and worse. In the new movie minus one, which is a good movie,
Okay.
they do an interesting thing where it's basically the original movie essentially.
Oh, okay.
Like more or less.
Hmm.
Like it happens after World War II, and Godzilla appears and he destroys a lot of things. But instead of like the government doing anything about it, what happens is that like the characters of the movies are like the government isn't going to do anything. They aren't going to um like they're going to pretend they're going to like try to not like they keep saying that the government is just going to like not do anything so they don't create any panic. And so we,
Right.
like people, basically like veterans of World War II, we'll have to come together to form our own separate group to find a way to destroy um Godzilla. But they like use like they have like all the same stuff. Like they have like giant boats and like they use airplanes
Mm.
and all this stuff. So it's essentially like the same like It's the same, essentially the same like infrastructure that
Uh,
the army and government has like in the original movie, but for some reason they decide like to make the decision for it not to be the government, but to be basically again like veterans of World War II that are like disenfranchised with the government.
so is Godzilla minus one? Okay, I have two questions about this. First of all, so is it a period piece then? Does it take place
Yes,
like
it
that?
is.
Okay, and then is it a Japanese film?
Yes,
Okay, okay, I wasn't sure because I saw it showing like in theaters near us, and
it is a
typically like
Japanese
they
film.
don't
It's completely
choose.
in Japanese.
Okay, that's awesome. That's cool that they showed that because Reno isn't exactly famous for showing a lot of in not indie films, but foreign films of any kind. So that's cool that that film has such a wide release. And I think that's of course partly due to the recent Godzilla films, which I know there's another
Yeah, they
Godzilla
got
come
one
out,
where
right?
it's like Godzilla and King Kong together doing their thing. Right. And again, I guess that's an important piece of history. Like Godzilla is essentially like Japan's response to King Kong because King
Yeah.
Kong came out in the 30s but then I
Hmm.
think it had a resurgence of popularity in the 50s. And so Japanese producers were like, we should make our own King Kong sort of. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's such like I love the Godzilla King Kong thing because they're both such like fascinating representations of their cultures, like the way America sort of sees itself and how like
Yeah.
Japan sees
Yeah.
themselves in like these different monsters and how they're like the reflections of sort of the worst parts of ourselves and the parts that we kind of want to be hidden and the parts we kind of wish we could destroy. I mean, especially
Uh-huh.
like when I think of like King Kong and sort of like this giant
Yeah.
right
Ape.
ape that
They steal from Africa, I think, pretty
yeah,
much.
exactly,
They take them
right?
from
Like
Africa.
it's
Yeah.
literally like the original King Kong is
Yeah.
basically like about the slave trade. I mean, it's
I like
an
the original
imitation
King
of
Kong.
it.
It's a good movie.
Yeah.
But
Another like
I think I prefer Godzilla.
I think so too. I mean, I understand like they're both representations of their own cultures and times in history. And certainly like I mean, you kind of think of like King Kong as sort of what like the white man's guilt or like that kind of like
Yeah.
um you know, I mean, very sort of literal interpretation of like the slave trade and all of the complications that come with it. But then Godzilla I think kind of has that extra layer because there's something sort of more modern about it, where like the American like we're looking at something that like happened. They're looking at it through like the lens of the past, where Godzilla is looking at
Yeah,
it as
like the
like more like
Godzilla is so immediate. Like it's
yeah.
just crazy how immediate like the response is, yeah, to the
Hmm.
World War II.
Yeah, which
Um, yeah, there are multiple King
can you
Kong versus
imagine?
Godzilla movies. Like, there are a couple old ones, but I haven't seen them yet.
Hmm.
I really need to.
Yeah, it's. I thought about watching a couple for this, but the only Godzilla movies I've seen, well, now is the original, and then I remember I saw the 2014 one when it came out, but
Yeah,
that's it. But honestly, I don't really remember much about the 2014 one. Like thinking
it's a
back,
good
I
movie.
can't. It's a good
It's a
movie.
good movie.
Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
remember being a good movie, but I can't remember like.
The sequels are good too, I think, for the most
Okay,
part.
yeah.
I think those movies are good. Um, and from what I've seen from the Godzilla sequels, they're good. Although the movie that they come out with right after, like the movie that Japan produces and makes like the sequel basically to Godzilla,
Mhm.
um, I don't even remember anything about it. I watched it probably not too long ago, probably like a year ago. I don't remember anything about it. But the other day I watched Mothra versus Godzilla, and that movie was kick ass. It was really cool. Um, but yeah, it's crazy. They have like the old Godzilla movies, which, but all the old Godzilla movies, which I think are called like the Showa Godzilla movies,
Right.
are very accessible. They're like on multiple streaming services,
Okay.
which is great. But then once I think you get into like the 80s and 90s and 2000s Godzilla movies, um, they're very inaccessible, which is disappointing because I've heard those are really cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before my computer runs out of battery, I'm looking at about 20% now. Should probably wrap up this conversation. That way we get
Okay.
the full effect. I mean, we still talked for like 40 minutes, so it's not like we didn't. I feel
Yeah.
like we got a good grasp of this film. But do you want to
We
give
didn't talk about
your
the ending.
okay, let's do the ending
Well,
and
I
then
was just
the
gonna say
final
like
thoughts.
I was gonna say like the ending is kind of like King Kong, where even though King Kong and Godzilla are like terrible and like kind of mindless creatures that destroy everything,
Yeah.
when they die, it's kind of sad. You know,
Yeah.
there's like
Yeah.
an element of like, oh, that kind of sucks. Like it's not like a triumphant moment, and it's extra. Obviously, it's extra. It's also not super triumphant because the guy sacrifices himself.
Yeah. Oh my God. That okay. I know I said we should wrap it up, but I do want to talk about those underwater scenes because
Yeah,
those
they're cool.
they look fucking amazing. I mean, it looks like
It looks like they're underwater.
I mean, you can shoot underwater. Like they had the
Yeah,
technology to shoot underwater by this point. So I'm guessing like they fucking went underwater because it looks amazing. And I remember reading a review on Letterbox about like how this is sort of like a reflection of how like Japan like had to interact with the world or how like the world itself was interacting. Like everything's kind of in slow motion. Like you know how when you're
yeah,
underwater, like the harder you try to move,
yeah,
like the slower you go, right? And they have this like super heavy equipment, and it's just like
yeah.
it's so like haunting, and it just feels like you're stuck. You know, like you're in this molasses, as it were,
Mhm.
and that's kind of feels like the moment the world is in, where it's like we're trying really hard as
It's like stuck in time.
yeah, like we're stuck in this moment, and the harder we try to move forward, right, the more we're kind of stuck in it, and sort of this idea of like burying our past and trying to forget about it,
Yeah.
like doesn't do anything. Like it's still there, it still exists, the radiation, the trauma, all of it, and
Well, yeah,
just
and then but yeah, and then Serizawa, his response, of course, is to kill himself, right? Like he
yeah,
destroys himself for the good of just killing Godzilla, ending that, but also taking the his weapon with him,
yeah,
right? Because now no one will have it.
because he believes that like us as humans, like we're fundamentally flawed, and you know whether
Yeah.
for whatever reason, like he, as we talked about earlier, like he's going to reveal that secret, and so the only way that secret stays with him is if he
Yeah.
sacrificed himself in that moment, and it's a beautiful moment and a haunting moment. I think it's uh, haunting in a lot more ways than King Kong. I mean, of course, that King Kong moment is sad, but in this, like, because you're not only killing Godzilla, but you know he's destroying an
Yeah.
entire like micro ecosystem, right? Because and that's the point he makes. Like it won't just kill him; it'll kill like everything in the surrounding area. And this is a harbor town, right? This is a town that survives off of fishing and these sorts of things. And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you've basically, you know, sure you've saved the town, quote unquote, but like how is the town going to survive when like everything depends on this harbor and now like everything in the harbor is killed for
Hmm.
I don't who knows how long, right? It doesn't that's not really clear, but it's a haunting and terrible moment, and it begs the question of like, what was the point? Like, you know, what was even like destroying him the right move? Like, was that the right decision? And I don't think there's any good answer. Like, it's not to say like, oh, they did the right
Again, it's not
thing or
like a
they did the
triumph.
wrong
It's not
thing.
even like a happy triumphant ending. It's just kind of like, well, I guess that's over with. Now
I,
what? Like,
yeah, I forgot about those underwater. I don't know how I forgot about that because I remember like being in that moment and being like, oh fuck, that is
the music during that part is also fucking
oh
crazy.
oh my god.
Oh, good. I like the theme too. Like that kind of like the Jaws theme, right? Like the theme where
Yeah.
when Godzilla's destroying thing. Classic. Just classic iconic music.
Oh, it's just truly amazing. Okay. Now we really should wrap it up because
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm quickly losing. Okay. So I think this is a film with a lot of expectations pressed onto it. I mean, as you pointed out, Godzilla is the longest running movie franchise in film history, or at the very least, one of the longest, if not the longest. And there's just so much history when you think about all of the mini films that were made about this and sort of the Americanization of this film and the different interpretations throughout the world of Godzilla. And so I sort of come to this film with like a lot of ideas of what Godzilla is, not only from being a little kid and, you know, thinking about like that Godzilla, but then like as an adult and learning these different things and coming from like a cinematic history and understanding sort of the complexities of course, like post-war Japan and all these different things. But even with all of those expectations, I still didn't expect the film I got. And I very much love that. Like, it still felt like a very raw and personal experience. And I think this can be something that's very hard to do in these sort of political or war dramas or monster movies, whatever genre you want to arbitrarily put this into, is often these films feel so big that we kind of lose that personal element. But I don't think that happens here, even though sort of our main characters, they're sort of a lot of times on the sidelines. I mean, of course, they're the ones that eventually destroy the monster, but like they're not the ones directly affected by it. Yet it feels incredibly personal, and I think part of it, of course, is because this film is released just it's released 9 years after, so it was created even 8 or 7 years after the bombing, which is it's crazy to think that people who
Yes,
witnessed this
yes.
atrocities would now go to the theater for this experience. I mean,
Yeah, that's
that
amazing.
is truly wild, and such a representation of the world and the culture of Japan at this moment in time, and all the anxieties and fears, and just from a film perspective, I mean, beautiful, great cinematography, incredible special effects, beautiful sound design, wonderful music, some really incredible performances by some of my favorite actors here. So easily a 9 out of 10 for me.
I'm willing to go a step above and say that it's like a 10 out of 10 for me. Just
Wow.
because like I really do think like it is the perfect synthesis of like all these different things. Um, there's just nothing like it, you know. I can't really think of anything else like it. You know, there's been plenty of like, you got the new Godzilla out, you got Oppenheimer, which
Sure.
is definitely an amazing movie about the atomic bomb, but I don't think there's any like meditation about the atomic bomb that's as astute and perfect as the original Godzilla movie. Like we've watched other movies too, like Grave of the Fireflies, which is another good one about that.
Mhm.
Um, but again, like I just don't think that there's any other movie that does it perfectly and as accessibly as this
Mhm.
one, where again, I think anyone in the world at any point in time would be able to appreciate this movie for what it is at whatever age is what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
so, and that's hard to do considering how heavy the subject matter is. So yeah, to me, this is what like movies are all about. I just think I wouldn't change anything about it. So definitely a 10 out of 10.
Wow. Amazing. All right, y'all. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
Yeah, I'm on Letterboxd at Retro Ranger, RETR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You also can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say. You can also find us on our Patreon at patreon.com/with nothing to say. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks.